Buckle up for YAAACE's new community safety podcast called Safer Communities Canada, where we're going to have brave conversation about issues impacting local communities all across Canada. We'll examine the root cause of violence and the various risk factors that contribute to perpetuating community violence. This is part of knowledge mobilization that is happening out of our Center for Community Safety and Roots of Violence. I'll be hosted by myself, YAAACE Executive Director, Artavan Izadarad, and also Assistant Professor in the Faculty of Education, Wilfred Laurier, as well as Founding Director of YAAACE, Devon Jones. Together, we will delve deep into the heart of various issues. We want to explore innovative solutions, partnerships, and collaborations that are leading by example to create safer communities for all Canadians. Our insightful discussions will be with experts, professionals, community leaders, and people with lived experiences, with the goal of empowering you with knowledge and inspiration for personal and collective action. Because community safety is all our responsibilities, so together, let's build stronger, thriving communities and ensure a safer tomorrow for everyone. So let's tune in and be part of the solution. I am super excited to have our guest here with us today. He's well known to the YAAACE family, but I think he'll have so much rich, insightful nuggets to share with us. He's the one and only Curtis Bell. I'm going to read a brief bio and then learn more about your story through our conversation. So Curtis Bell is the father of four and a Black Chippewa. After graduating from University of Washington, was the first selection in the 1989 CFL draft by the Hamilton Ticats and also played for the Toronto Argos. He's developed several programs since 1998, including Learn About Addictions with Road Toad, a grade 6 to 8 curriculum clearinghouse resource, Playground Politics, 7 Principles of Self-Leadership with Street Wolf, Learn About Disabilities with Conductor Cosmo, Ninth Heaven Healing Academy, Gang Initiative, Hood Habits graphic novel, Peace Frog Playbook, Eagle Eye and Bright Path, Laurier University Jumpstart Program, and United Way COVID Recovery Workbook. It's fair to say you've done quite a bit with curriculum and being in this space. You've facilitated resources all over Canada, including many Indigenous communities. You've been a high school football head coach at Cathedral High School in Hamilton for the past decade. And you have extensive background as an educator and healer in mental wellness, addictions, post-traumatic stress disorder, conflict resolution, and emotional intelligence. And you've acquired a number of certificates over the years to help you lead in those roles, which involve mental health first aid instructor, Ontario roster of mediators, restorative justice, addiction counseling, seeing oneself and self-esteem in family affairs. And above all, you're a family man, and you're proud of your children's hard work and success as scholar athletes playing in the NCAA. So want to really welcome you and thank you for being here.
Appreciate it.
All right, so we'll start off very broadly. Really, what does community safety mean to you? And what 3 words come to your mind when you think of that?
It's pretty simple. People need to live in a community environment that is non-threatening, being able to walk freely without the threat of violence, not hearing gunfire in the distance. But it goes even beyond that. Communities need access to healthcare, proper policing, access to jobs. We have a homeless issue in the city. We have addictions. We have drug dealers. Drug dealers equate to guns and violence.
Yeah.
So.
Great, thank you for that.
And my 3 words would be reclaim, restore, revalue.
That's deep. And I know in our next question, you're going to maybe deconstruct those, which is really tell us a little bit about your journey and how you entered this community space, things like what motivated you, how did you get into the field, and obviously what kind of projects you ended up leading, reflecting your identity and who you are.
I mean, my roots would be probably working with youth and starting with coaching football. And these days when you coach football, it's beyond the duty of a coach. You have to be more of a father figure, counselor, someone who, offers support on and off the field. Back in the day, you just blew your whistle, kids went home.
Yeah.
With all the things going on in their lives, they're navigating through a lot of issues. So that propelled me in 1998. I was contracted to create a book teaching kids about addictions. And it was called Learn About Addiction and Help People Who Suffer with Road Toad. And boom, I hit it out of the park right off the hop. It became a curriculum clearinghouse resource. And it had, from there, I spent 15 years facilitating that book to thousands and thousands of kids. And from there, like you said in the introduction, I was then contracted by the Ontario Federation of Indigenous Friendship Centers to write a leadership book for Indigenous youth called Street Wolf. From there, March of Dimes contracted me to write and teach kids about disabilities. And I was familiar with disabilities because my mother has a disability. And speaking of my mother, she was on the Immigration and Refugee Board in the 80s. She lobbied for convention refugees. So she changed immigration laws.
That's amazing.
In this country. She's now Commissioner of Human Rights in Ontario, second term. So it kind of ran in my family, right?
Yeah, the roots were there.
That's right. I've always had significant role models in my family. My uncle's also Lincoln Alexander, the Honorable. So I guess I was raised somewhat, even subconsciously, to follow in their footsteps. And it's called giving back, right?
Yeah.
Servitude.
No, that's great. And I think, that's so important. I think, you speak about, what it means to be a caring adult today. And,
That's right.
It's beyond just being the coach. You wear so many different hats,
Exactly.
And I think, myself having coached with YAAACE, some people need more of the caring love and some people know more of the caring, compassionate love. And then some people need more of the tough love. And it's not to say one is better than the other, but I think the art of coaching and being that mentor is recognizing what are their needs and how do you meet them.
I like to call it a feeling eye and a seeing hand. That empathy.
Yeah.
You've got to be born with it, really.
Yeah, that's great. So, I want to connect it to, I know I've had so many great conversations with you around, helping me understand an Indigenous perspective and how you center that in your work. And I think that's so important when we think about, Canada's 94 calls to action as part of truth and reconciliation and this journey that not only our country is on, but also each local community based on the demographics of people living there. Mm-hmm. And so how has your experience been growing up, as a Afro-Indigenous person, but more specifically as Black Chippewa? And I know even you shared with me with one of the curriculums that you created, what was the significance of the Road Toad? And so how you center that knowledge into what you do. So I'd love for you to, deconstruct that a little bit for our listeners.
Road Toad, I guess, spawned from within the Indigenous tradition. Being here on Turtle Island for 57 years, I've learned a lot, especially through storytelling. My great-grandmother, she was originally from North Carolina. The Tuscaroras helped her people come to Canada. It's not in our history books, but it was definitely, knowledge that came from her rocking chair on our porch, And I was fortunate enough as a youngster to have a grandmother and great-grandfather. My great-grandfather was half Chippewa and half Black. And he married my grandmother, who was full Black once again from North Carolina. I was fortunate enough to be. I lost them when I was about 10 years old, so I had about 10 years of knowledge from them in my formidable years. And the storytelling is so important because they were only one generation removed from slavery.
Yeah.
So their conversations were deep. So I learned to be proud, to be passionate, and to have purpose. And it's what I always say to my own children: practice with passion, pride, and purpose. That road toad came from the metaphor of rebirth. Just like somebody who's in the recovery process, whether it be an alcoholic or drug addict, or anyone with addictions, right? There's so many addictions. But specifically the toad itself, it lives on land and water, right? It represents the cleansing period in your life, and that's why we use the toad as the character.
And that's a beautiful analogy, because when I think about folks who perhaps have made mistakes, we think about youth who have been kind of exposed to risk factors and maybe get charged or incarcerated.
Yes.
It's almost like, learning from it and being able to be reborn, or to show folks you learn from your mistake.
Yes.
Right? I know
and everyone deserves a second chance.
Yeah. I know one of the sayings I live my life by is the key to life is never make the same mistake twice. And so it really aligns with that saying. Okay, while we're on this topic, I remember myself when I was in university, I learned about the concept of two-eye seeing, which in the indigenous culture was kind of like, oftentimes we get into these binary oppositional arguments. And, when I learned about two-eye seeing, and what I loved about it is, we're trying to find the best from different cultures, different communities, and see how we can complement them to meet the needs of the people living there, or even in case of a large country. And so I think as we apply that to a community safety lens and thinking about how do we support communities, let's start with something we're seeing a lot of, which is land acknowledgements. We see that being performed a lot by schools, statements made by most institutions now. But, do you think that's good enough? And if the answer is no, which I think it would be, and I would agree with, what else do we need to further push the boundary and make it meaningful and tangible?
That's a very good question. I'm offended by that acknowledgement or that appreciation. Like I said earlier to you, I'm just a transparent guy. We would appreciate our land back. We would appreciate access to health care. We would appreciate our traditions back, our customs, our language. So I think they're missing the mark on this. It's kind of phony, and I'm more about a real guy. I think we have to, honestly, just to cut through everything, we have to end generational trauma. That's where it starts for me. I think that's my spoke in the wheel. That's my role. Everyone else is doing an outstanding job at what they do, and I don't try to step out of my lane. For me, it's about healing kids, and that's basically how I was inspired to create Nine Heavens. The soldier can't heal on the battlefield, right?
Well said.
So we have kids in these neighborhoods, and I'm not going to mention any specific neighborhood, it doesn't matter, that are wounded soldiers. They're injured, and they don't have a significant time to get out of that funk, whether it be in the community or in their own houses. I can't imagine what COVID did to some kids. They live in hell in their house.
Yeah.
They live in domestic violence, that are sexually abused, live with people with addictions. I don't know how they survived, So for me, my spoke is that relocation aspect. to get the cat off the hot tin roof. Once they are removed from whatever that heat is, they have a chance to peel off their layers of pain and anger, of grief, of suffering. And once they can do that, they could begin the healing journey. I always call it childhood deprivation. You know, kids are skipping childhood, having to they have parental duties. Some of them, right? There's that neglect. There's that absenteeism from many fathers. They're honestly, they're women that have their nails are more important than what's in the cupboard, what's for breakfast. You know, I can go on.
Yeah. I mean, I think you give a really great example of like, you know, I use the term toxic environment. If you are in a toxic environment, and when we add this layer of, oftentimes when we try to diagnose someone, we make it about the individual factors like attitude and effort.
That's right.
But we don't talk enough about the systemic piece of like exposure to violence, which is in your home environment, or exposure to abuse, or exposure to community violence and hearing sirens all the time in your community, and what kind of psychological impact that has on you.
That just struck a nerve there. Our first year at Nine Heavens, we were funded by Justice Canada. Guns and Gangs initiatives, and we, as a measurement tool, we used the Harvard trauma scale. At the time, no one was using it. I was consulted. I delivered it. And
tell us a little bit about that scale for folks who are not familiar with it.
Yeah, because you just struck a nerve with what you said. Yeah. Part of trauma is numbing your feelings, right? Avoidance.
Yeah.
And one of the questions was, how often do you hear gunfire? Often, sometimes, not very often, rarely, or not at all. And I remember a few of the boys, because they tried to trick the test, but they're not smart enough to trick it, right?
Yeah.
One of the questions was, how often do you hear gunfire? And based on those words, and they said rarely. They circled rarely. And then a few more questions down the page. When was the last time you heard gunfire? And they said last week. You know, that's numbing. When a kid can lay up a basketball and not even flinch and miss that shot when there's gunfire in the air, that's now conditioning response. That's now, I accept this. It's normal to me. When we all know it's not. Right.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great example. And I mean, I want to tell us a little bit more about the Ninth Heaven Healing Academy. Particularly, that's when I met you. When you know, I came on a road trip when I was coaching with Devon Jones, the founder of YAAACE, and I know for 90 weekends, you know, together brought up a cohort of youth from the Jane and Finch community there. And as you were explaining the process of, you know, it's to create that brave space where folks can be vulnerable while you're also teaching them lessons, you're teaching them coping mechanisms. So walk me through it for someone who has no idea. Where is Ninth Heaven Healing Academy? What kind of things you would do on a weekend when you're there so folks can visualize it?
Can I tell you what inspired it?
Yes, of course. Tell us the whole story.
Like I said, Juliet Morales, who was a colleague of Devon Jones at the time when he was at Brookview, they had a principal there, Jackie Spence, at the time.
Yes.
And she was at Shoreham, actually.
Yeah.
She had me come in and talk with kids in grade 2 and 3 about violence, about the root of violence and alternatives to violence and whatnot. And I noticed when I came into the school, and this area was, you know, I've known it, but it was relatively new to me. And so when I entered the school, we're talking grade 2 and 3, and it's funny because the first kid I met, he ended up in Nine Heavens. And he, on his book, on one of his notebooks, he had Sure Shot on his notebook. And I'm like, no, what does that mean? And he said, I'm from Shoreham, so I'm sure to get shot. And obviously never forgot it. So that week, coincidentally, there was a sporting store in the Hamilton area that donated some clothing to me. So I thought, you know what, I'm going to conduct an experiment with it. And I brought just red and blue jerseys. And, you know, I'm on the north side of Finch, right? So at the end of the day, grade 2 and 3, I put the jerseys on a table and I said, come, these are free. Someone was nice enough to give them, come and take one. And not one of them took a red. So once again, that told me that they had been conditioned already.
Yeah.
They had been, I like to call it tailored, like that suit that fits you perfect. You know what I mean? And so I left the school very impacted by it. And being someone who's creative, my creative juices were just going. And so I called up Devon and said, you know, I think I have a really good initiative to introduce to Jane and Finch. We got some funding for one weekend. And we brought 10 boys out to Puslinch, which is in the middle of nowhere. I think you were there that first weekend.
Yeah.
And, you know, we take them to the res, Oswego. We had traditional healers. We treated them like children. We spoiled them, you know, horseback riding as therapy, connection to Mother Earth, trail walking, whatnot. And we noticed the layers that were peeled off. We just saw children. And then the most powerful piece to it was at the end of the weekend when it took them about half an hour to reboard the bus. They just didn't want to go back. And you could tell that they were putting the armor back on to prepare for the other side. So
that goes back to your analogy of, you know, the soldier has to return to the battlefield, right? So they got to do what they got to do to survive when they go back out there.
Exactly.
Right?
It's just normal behavior. Everything must fight to live. Every creature on the planet fights to live.
Yeah.
So we filmed it, which was kind of brilliant because I was able to show people the value of it. And I remember calling the feds, Alexis Carty, and I'm on the phone with him saying, you know, this is something really powerful. We need funding to do this. And I told him about Pressa, actually. Pressa was about 11 years old. And day 2, he asked me for a piggyback ride through the woods. And he said, hold the phone. And got a senior analyst on the phone and said, tell them what you just told me. And boom, we were funded for a year.
Amazing.
After the Harvard trauma scale, we were able to prove there are different levels of trauma, from acute trauma to complex trauma, because there's different variations of trauma. We were successful in 3 more years funding. So for 4 years solid, we had 40 boys. 90% of them stayed in the program for those 4 years. So we basically became surrogate fathers. You know, it became such a powerful piece that they had to be in conflict with the law to be chosen, to be recommended for the program, referred. And kids that didn't have a charge or whatnot said they were going to go out and get one just to come to Nine Heavens. What do you say to that?
I mean, I think it speaks to the power of when you create an environment where people feel like they belong.
That's right.
They can be who they are and they can be heard and seen for who they truly are without having to conform or put on a performance. Yes. Then that's what engagement looks like. Ideally, that's what we want in our schools.
That's
but
right.
We know the curriculum, the lack of diversity, all of those contribute to folks feeling like they don't belong. And as sometimes acts of resistance, maybe they push back.
Yes.
Right.
It's amazing to see deadened eyes. And I'm kind of clairvoyant when it comes to body language. And I've seen. I'll give you an example.
Yeah.
We had one boy there. He was 12 years old, and we were in Hamilton, and his father lives in Hamilton, and we called him up and said, we got your boy with us for the weekend. He'd really love to see you, and he said, no, I got a soccer game. Can't do it. And the boy, I won't say any names, in our next team meeting, wrote down on a piece of paper, "Dad," for a half an hour straight, to the point where he was ripping through the page. This was the same boy who had a fit of rage at Brookview and shredded his T-shirt. And Mr. Saban put it in the trophy case as a symbol of rage. And so this kid was sitting across the table with another kid, and they were at it all weekend. And, they started name calling, bitch, blah, blah, blah. And then finally the one boy says, "At least I got a dad." Mm-hmm. And he had a pen in his hand and just and threw it like it was a dart right at his head, and it just went right by his head.
Wow.
And I said, I'm looking, if we don't help this child, if we don't save this child, I'm looking in the eyes of a murderer. And we ran out of funding. He slipped through the cracks, and when he was 16 years old, committed murder in Hamilton. And the boy that he threw the pen at was Houdini, the rapper.
Wow.
So one's dead, and one's doing life.
Yeah, I mean, those are crazy stories, and
you know what they are? Preventable stories.
Exactly.
And I think that's my place in all of this. That's the spoke that I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Prevention, man. As the saying goes, worth more than a pound of cure, an ounce of it, right?
Yeah, I know me and Devon always have this, that it's. I mean, we always seem to be reactive, and we put our money when something high profile happens or the victims are young.
That's right.
But it's always better in the long run to invest in prevention, which the interesting thing becomes
and sorry to interrupt.
No, go ahead.
That brings me back to that coalition meeting. We were talking about the cost of homicide.
Yeah.
It's roughly $4.5 million to $5 million. So imagine slip us $200,000 for more weekends, and you might save yourself $5 million.
Yeah, and an interesting trend that actually came out was that last year, 90 youth, meaning 18 and under, were charged with homicide, where previous to that, the last 10 years, the average was around 39, so nearly doubled.
That's crazy.
Which tells us we really need to focus on the early years, when in fact, due to high-profile incidents, and the way the narratives are told, we've been focusing on harsher bail reform and things like that, which really, once again, focuses on the individual and tries to situate evil as this individual decision, when in fact, it's often people in shitty circumstances having shitty choices that end up gravitating towards
hood
violence,
habits.
Right? Which is a perfect question, hood habits. And that was my next question. I love when you're doing a project, you really invest in documenting the process.
Yeah.
And I think that's also, for me, based on my knowledge, it's an indigenous way of it's like, the product is important, but the process sometimes is even more important. And it doesn't mean every kid you had, you might be able to save them, because it's so complex, their lives. And
it surely is.
Right? And so I know you created this resource called Hood Habits with the kids you had for 90 weekends and all the journaling they had to do. So tell us a little bit about that and how that came to be.
Once again, getting back to indigenous ways, I was encouraged, even as a young person, to even to collect my dreams, because our dreams teach us more than our waking hours, actually. So I always knew the power of journaling, and so that's what I encouraged the kids to do at Nine Heavens, and I would because even with my own kids, it's about rewards. Life, you do good things, you get rewarded. So if they followed the task of journaling experiences on the weekends, I would reward them somehow. That was the catch. And so part of the deliverables was to create a graphic novel based on all of their journaling. And I started it with Father's Day, Hood Habits. And the reason why I did was not to call out fathers, but to recognize, have whoever reads the book recognize that the absence of the father is probably one of the biggest factors and root causes for me. Just that rejection, that neglect. How did that man who created me not even want to be part of me? That's hard. That's difficult to navigate through as a child. And so one of the weekends, it was Father's Day. And I was like, how am I going to address Father's Day when some fathers are in jail, they're deported, the child doesn't even know who their father is.
That's a tough conversation.
They've
Could
been
be
murdered.
even triggering, yeah.
So you know what I did? I went to the dollar store and I got Father's Day cards. And before breakfast, I placed them all down at every seat and said, no matter where your father is today, whether you love him dearly or hate him, what would you say to him? And for 20 minutes, they just stared at the card. And I finally said, just even sign it, or no one eats. So they started to jot things down, and I'm not going to lie. It was honestly the only time I had a breakdown.
Wow. That's powerful.
An emotional breakdown, because I couldn't believe as a parent myself. I couldn't fathom how you can bring someone into this world and then check out on them. And I think that you talk about community safety, and man, that's something that we need to sign a peace treaty or something within our own people.
Yeah.
Let's put down the guns. Let's stop the toxic masculinity. Let's respect our women. The worst thing for me is the N word. I can't believe it's used so callously when it's derivatives, where it comes from. If kids only knew.
Yeah.
And I get the endearment and the deflection and whatnot. It's just, man, we need to come together harmoniously as people with one common goal, and that's shared responsibility. And it starts with family. We are dealing with post-slavery syndrome.
Yeah.
Right? Which is a big topic. I'm trying to explore it right now, not in detail, but introduce it to some people with my new project I'm working on.
Yeah, and I think what's interesting is we almost have to look, if the goal is to have youth not be involved in the justice system, we have to look for answers outside of the justice system.
We have to think outside the box.
Yeah, so education, schools, the family unit. And I think what happens often is we don't look for synergies amongst them. Everybody's trying to do a little bit of it on their own.
Yeah.
And sometimes they're fighting for the same resources.
It's tribalism.
Which kind of becomes this divide and conquer strategy that the system pits different people and different identities against each other.
What are some organizations' motives? What are their true motives? And what are their solutions? Solutions have to be offered.
Definitely.
Right? Integrated strategies.
So, for example, I know at YAAACE here, we're big on making sure all our programs or services are accessible. And what I mean by that is, the monetary cost. There could be a program, but who can afford it? How far do they have to travel? And then the other piece, which I think is a big gap in the system, is culturally reflective services. So services that integrate people's cultural practices, their lineage, and the diversity of who delivers that. Because if there is no trust, and we know in the community safety space, when we think about even the no snitching culture, there's no trust, nothing can be done.
Trust over time is truth.
Yeah, well said. And I think when you had the boys 90 weekends, I'm sure it started out not trusting you, but through how you showed up for them, through you showing empathy and care, you ended up bringing those walls down, which allowed you to have some of those meaningful interactions.
It started with discipline.
Yeah.
Children want to be disciplined. Some have not been told how to be, especially in their formidable years, those first 4 years. And that's why prevention is the cure.
Yeah.
It has to start from the cradle. It has to start from the womb. You know, how many toxic relationships are women in while they're pregnant? And that child is already experiencing violence.
Yeah, I mean, all of those add up as risk factors, right?
That's right. That's what I'm working on right now, the root causes of violence from my perspective. And like I said, it's heavy on trauma, generational. Yeah, whether it be Black, Indigenous, or New Canadian. How many kids that are coming here from other countries have participated or witnessed civil wars and atrocities?
Yeah.
And what is Canada offering to them to deal with that trauma?
Yeah, and as you said, if the intergenerational or the current trauma is not addressed, that can have collateral damage in terms of how frustration and the anger is expressed. Sometimes it's as an act of simply wanting to be heard or getting the attention.
That's right.
Right?
That's right.
So I got a few questions to kind of wrap it up with the few minutes we have. I think, you just mentioned the term review, the roots of violence, and I was reminded of a report that came out in 2008 called The Review of the Roots of Violence by Dr. Alvin Curling and Roy McMurtry. And that happened after Jordan Manners died. When the first time a student died within a high school, in this family of schools in the Jane and Finch at C.W. Jeffries. And, Devon was teacher of Jordan Manners. And
can I just say one?
Yeah, of course.
One of the boys in Nine Heavens witnessed that murder, and the trauma he was carrying with him was just exponential.
Yeah, I don't think you'll ever be the same witnessing something like that. And we know many other folks who witnessed.
What does he do? First thing they do, self-medicate.
Yeah.
How much weed are our kids smoking up? And how much do they not know about the drug?
Yeah, and the side effects and the long term, and how do we provide them with other coping mechanisms? Because at the end of the day, it's a coping mechanism.
That's right.
And we want it to be positive versus negative.
Exactly.
So I guess my question is, what do you see, having been in the field and been doing this work in so many amazing ways, from curriculum to weekend retreats, where are the current gaps when you think of the system or the ecosystem of community safety and how we're trying to find solutions? There's obviously some certain barriers and challenges.
Yeah. One would be being culturally specific.
Okay.
Meeting the needs of youth according to their culture. We're sorely lacking in those resources.
So I'm going to push the envelope. So be a little bit more specific. So for the Black and the Indigenous community, what does it mean to you to be culturally specific in terms of action, in terms of how a program looks like?
For Indigenous youth, and I mean even Black youth, we are so far removed from our natural environment, and that's Mother Earth. There's a disconnection. People don't realize when your feet touch grass or the dirt, it has powerful mechanisms. For one, healing being one of them. The importance of silence. What kid today doesn't have a phone in their hand?
Yeah.
And any Indigenous elder will tell you the power of silence. It does wonders for the human mind. We're for myself, I am the grandson of fugitive slaves in the mid 1960s, before the Emancipation Proclamation,
Yeah.
my grandfather and his brother at 21 years old traveled 700 miles through the woods to come to Canada and ring the freedom bell. In that passage, I became Indigenous. I'm not just Chippewa. I have Erie on one side and I have Potawatomi on another side. The Tuscaroraans helped us through the Forbidden Trail. Why have we not learned this?
Yeah.
Why have we not learned? Why am I telling the world this now? So colonialism still exists.
Definitely.
Right? And getting back to the N-word, emancipate yourself from mental slavery. None but ourselves will free our minds.
Marcus Garvey.
Right?
Yeah.
We're not there yet. We're simply not there. And there's so many other distractions now that honestly make me believe, will we ever get there?
Yeah. Well, it's been really insightful, this conversation. I think we can keep going for hours, so I'll leave it.
We can go.
I'll leave it with a final question, which is, what advice would you have as kind of a punchline, whether it's for youth, parents, other educators, or community leaders listening, and anything else you would like to share that perhaps the questions I posed didn't cover?
We need to. I think human beings are the farthest that we've ever been from spirituality.
Spirituality.
And we need to talk about revalue, reclaim, restore. It starts with that. For me.
And I think it goes beyond mental health, because I think some people think spirituality and mental health are synonymous, but they're not.
I'm not talking religion. And I'm not talking about, I'm not just saying it.
Yeah.
I mean it. It resonates through me. We need to be human again. I think we've strayed.
Great. Anything else you want to add before we wrap it up?
I'm cool in the gang, man.
Man, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Really appreciate you making time out of your busy schedules to always be here.
Yes.
We want to thank all the listeners. Thank you for being part of the Safer Communities Canada podcast led by YAAACE and its Center for Community Safety and Roots of Violence. We look forward to having many, many, many more brave conversations with our future guests. Thank you.